I want to start this video out by addressing the obvious, which is I have not posted in quite a few weeks, probably 4 weeks at least. I wanted to take a step back, but I have also been dealing with some health issues on my own end. I do suffer from some severe anxiety and some depression, the fun stuff. So I did take some time off. But today I'm really excited to take my research and get this case out to you guys. This specific case is very near and dear to my heart, and I say that because it's literally a case that was regionally not far from me and my home. And this case took place in Morenci, Michigan, which is roughly about 2.5 hours from my house currently. The fact that I did not hear anything about this case is disturbing, especially with being so close in proximity to the location and the fact that these boys have not been found yet. Today we're covering the case of the Skelton brothers. We're going to start by discussing John and Tanya Skelton, which is the Skelton brothers' parents. John was born and raised in Florida. After John graduated, he actually was in the military and he traveled all over the place. As most military families, John was moving around from state to state, traveling quite a bit, and he finally ended up in actually Morenci, Michigan, and settling down. John fell in love. John actually met his first wife, and they got married, and they ended up having 2 daughters. And for whatever reason, I didn't really look into the information as to why their marriage did not work, but they did end up getting a divorce. His ex-wife took herself and her 2 daughters and moved out of state and really just kind of cut John out of the picture altogether. Now, John losing his wife and his daughter had a huge impact on him. So he really still, even after that, stuck around Morenci, Michigan, and he actually, in fact, ended up becoming a truck driver. And that is when he met Tanya. Let's get on to Tanya's story. Tanya was also married before. Tanya's first marriage did not end up very well. In 1998, Tanya was actually convicted of having an inappropriate sexual relationship with a 14-year-old boy. Of course, her husband was not a huge fan of that, and they ended up actually in divorce. Now, when they were married, Tanya and her husband at the time had 2 daughters as well. So John and Tanya met in Morenci, Michigan. Right off the bat, Tanya was very open, very honest about what her past looked like, the circumstances surrounding 1998, and what her life was like at that point in time. She was in a really bad mental spot, a really bad emotional state. It was just bad circumstances all around, really. She was trying really hard to move past that, work past that, and get past that, build her future in a better light. Now, when Tanya met John and she had talked to him about her past, he really didn't seem to mind whatsoever because, of course, right after that, they started dating. In November of 2001, John and Tanya gave birth to their first child together, and that was Andrew. Andrew would go on to be described as super smart and quiet. School was his absolute favorite. He enjoyed his time at school and he enjoyed his time with his friends, but he was definitely the quiet one. And people would even joke to say that he was kind of the analyzer. He was always very quiet, but he was always listening in on the adult conversations, always listening in when you may not think that he is. After they gave birth to Andrew in 2001, 2002, John and Tanya got married. And they go on to have Alexander. Now, they had Alexander on November 4th, 2003. Alexander reminds me of my second child as well, and Alexander could be described as the daredevil. He was never one to say no. He was always jumping his bike, racing. He was also considered to be like the biggest love bug. He was always wanting to cuddle and watch TV. John and Tanya, of course, went on to have little Mr. Tanner. Tanner was born October 20th, 2005. Tanner, of course, had the biggest imagination you could possibly imagine. He would always tell super detailed, elaborate stories, pull you in, and you're listening to everything. And once he got to the end of the story, he would always laugh, and then just say, haha, I was just kidding, I made it all up. He always wanted to be the center of attention, and definitely the center of attention of Mom's eye. I have spent hours and days and weeks on this case, over analyzing. I mean, to the point that I am on Google Maps looking, trying to trace everybody's timeline, trying to see where everybody's at. This case took place 2.5 hours from my house. I have 2 young boys myself. These boys remind me so much of my own. I could not imagine. It really just rips at my heart. So this story really bugs me, and I'm very passionate about getting this case out and this story out and their pictures out to tell you what happened, to tell you what we know at least has happened. And maybe somebody's out there. Maybe somebody's out there that knows a little bit more, that can add a little bit more clarification to the story. With that being said, these boys were super social. They loved school. They loved going to school. But most of all, these kids were outside boys. They wanted to do anything to do with outside. A lot of people in town would joke and, say that they probably don't even know what a TV is or a cell phone is. Because they were so much more concerned with playing outside and being together. And of course, all 3 boys played soccer as they were growing up. Now, Tanner, being 5 when he was playing soccer, pretty much just kind of ran as fast as what he could to keep up with everybody else. Now, Andrew was a great runner, and so he was super quick on the field. And remember, he was the oldest. Alexander was actually an amazing goalie, and they were always in the backyard, camping, fishing, 4-wheelers, bikes. I mean, you name it, these boys were on it. Now, you have to keep in mind, within this case, in this story, Morenci, Michigan, at the time was a very small town. It had about 1,500 residents. So you can imagine that everybody knew everybody. And so the people in town would actually describe the boys as super well behaved. They would say that those boys were so absolutely loved. John and Tanya had a really good run together for quite a while before things started kind of going downhill. John, months prior to this incident, actually I think in fact the year before this incident, he had lost his job, was having trouble finding another one. He began drinking excessively and locking himself away in his room, playing video games. I mean, he was very isolated, it seemed. Now, Tanya would go on to say that even when they were having financial struggles, that John would always make sure that he was budgeting for his alcohol and his cigarettes. He was invested pretty deep into his own addiction. Now, the summer of 2010, John goes to his high school reunion, which, if you remember correctly, was down in Florida, and he actually went by himself. And when he came back, I don't want to describe him as weird because I wasn't involved, so I can't really say, but the things that he was coming back saying, I find very strange. He comes home stating it, he just kind of wanted to up and move his entire family down to Florida all of a sudden, which makes sense in a way because John grew up down in Florida. Perhaps he thought it would be better space for the kids. Being in Michigan, and I know because I only live 2 hours away from this location, we do get a lot of snow. So perhaps the boys who enjoy being outside so much, maybe they'll like it better down in Florida. He never said any of that. He just didn't really give much of a reason. He just said that, hey, I just want to move the family down to Florida. And of course, Tanya said absolutely not. I think that's a ridiculous idea due to the fact that at this point, I think Tanner, being 5, had just started his first year of kindergarten literally a week or 2 prior to this. That's a critical year. I truly believe that. That's an important year to miss anything. So kudos to Tanya because I would have done the same thing. Absolutely not. So on a Monday morning in September of 2010, Tanya drives the boys to school as she usually does. She drops the boys off and she takes their medications inside and takes them to the receptionist. And she's standing there kind of chit-chatting with the receptionist about her day, about what's going on. Says goodbye, and she takes off. Now, when Tanya leaves, she actually calls John. John said he was getting around for work. He was hoping that he would get off work in time to be able to be home by about noon. And so Tanya takes off because she has a ton of errands to go take care of for the day, as she is now a stay-at-home mom. So she does her running around. She gets home, a couple hours later. She gets home to a mess of missed calls from the school. Tanya doesn't really panic because she knows that the school has her cell phone number. So if there's any kind of an emergency that would need her attention immediately, that of course they would call her cell phone. They wouldn't just call the house phone. But just in case, just to check and see what's going on, she calls the school back to find out what was needed. So Tanya speaks with the secretary, and the secretary stated that she didn't really want to be overthinking things, but she just wanted to make sure and double check with Tanya, because apparently after Tanya had left, John came back to the school and in fact picked up the boys only about a half hour after Tanya had left. When he was picking up the boys, he stated that it was because they were going to be going on a family vacation. Tanya had no idea. Not a very good husband, John. You did not invite your wife. I'm sure if they were really going on a family vacation down to Florida, that Tanya would have totally been on board and been like, oh, okay, let's go do this. So Tanya knew something was up. So, of course, in standard fashion, Tanya calls John and says, yo, what's going on? Where's the boys? And John says, oh, yeah, I just went and picked him up because we're just going to go down to Florida for a few weeks and just go hang out. John just could not understand why Tanya was upset. Tanya had no idea what to do, what the next step would be to protect her boys and try and figure out the situation as to what really was happening. But the next best thing that she knew to do was Tanya just kind of stalled him by giving him good reasons as to why that was a bad idea. Tanya said that it really wouldn't be a good idea for 2 weeks into school for the boys to take 2-3 weeks off. This is when John comes back and says, oh, that's not a problem, because I'm going to be enrolling the boys in school down in Florida when we get down there. At this point is when Tanya gets off the phone and reaches out to an attorney. The attorney did say that, there wasn't a whole lot that the police can do due to the fact that they are still married. He is allowed to take them out of state, but the next best thing would be to file for divorce and emergency custody of the boys. She had to get John back to the house so that he could be served with the papers and she could get her boys back. So Tanya is just scrambling, and she thought, you know what, I've got a really good idea. She calls John back and says, look, take the boys, that's fine, it's okay, I just wish you would have told me earlier. But if you're actually going to enroll them in school, the schools down there are also going to need the boys' birth certificates, social security cards, all this information, and you don't have any of those documents. So why don't you come on back, and we're going to show you, get you all stacked up, and you guys can head on out. With John on his way over, because he did agree to come over and pick up this stuff before he headed down to Florida with the boys, Tanya sent her daughters out to the lawyer to make sure to go and pay him and go meet with him and get the process started. So John and the boys come back to the house. In order to stall him, she starts searching around the house looking for these documents that she said that he's going to need in order to enroll the boys in school in Florida. Now, she said that she pretty well just knew exactly where these were. It took her less than 2 minutes to find them. But could you imagine trying to just stall continuously, waiting on somebody to show up and serve these papers to him? John gets a phone call on his cell phone. He immediately just starts yelling and getting irate and angry. Now, what this phone call was the lawyer that Tanya had just hired, just sent her daughters over to go pay and get to work on this case. John had also contacted him and tried to get him to represent him. The lawyer was calling John to let him know, sorry, your wife called me and she's paid me already, so I am obligated to represent her, and I would not be able to represent you at the same time as well. And John was pissed. This obviously blew the whole cover as to what she was doing and why she was stalling. John just grabs the boys. Now, Tanner did stay. Tanner came running inside because he heard yelling and he wanted to see what was going on. And Tanya had a friend or something over, and her friend had managed to keep him inside, and he did not go back with John. But Andrew and Alexander did. So John and the two boys take off, And literally 60 seconds later, the police pull up in order to serve John. So he had just missed being served. John ended up staying with a woman that he had reconnected with at the reunion. Him and the boys stayed there for some time. The next day after John had taken off, it was in fact actually Tanya's birthday, and John allowed the boys to call Tanya to say happy birthday to her. When she did that, when she talked to them, the boys actually told her exactly who they were staying with, which enabled Tanya to be able to track down exactly where they were at and find them. So with the information that Tanya had received from the boys, they were able to give her the first and last name of the person that they were staying with. So Tanya, of course, was able to find an address and find a location. So Tanya heads to Florida, and on her way there, she makes sure that she attains a Florida attorney, because she knew automatically that I'm sure that by the time she got down there that John would have an attorney as well. And she was correct. When Tanya got down there, her and John and both attorneys met in order to discuss the custody. Now, during this, John had actually accused Tanya of abusing her children. He used her past and criminal charges as a reasoning. Tanya's attorney said there's been absolutely zero evidence of this, and there's no credibility to these. There's been no accusations made, no reports made. This is completely false. And so with that, Tanya was given full custody. They all ended going back to Michigan. Now, when they got back, everything was obviously completely different. They had wanted counseling for the boys because, I mean, they just saw their father, rip them away from their mother. That's got to be traumatic. Just the whole ordeal had to have been traumatic for the boys. And John also wanted to pursue marriage counseling. And of course, Tanya was still proceeding with the divorce. She was not gonna be changing her mind, but at the time she wanted to try and appease John, so she agreed to marriage counseling. Now, while Tanya was proceeding with the divorce but yet still going to counseling for marriage, she and the boys moved about 2 blocks away from the house into her own house. The place that she was at, she was still able to see John's house. She was not far away at all. She could literally look out the window and see his house and his driveway. So it wasn't that far by any means. As they were kind of going through the motions of going to counseling and working through stuff, Tanya moved. She took the boys with her. John had visitation. Holidays are coming up. So, of course, they had to discuss, who's getting who when. They agreed that John would have the boys from Wednesday, November 24th through Friday, November 26th. And on Friday, November 26th, 2010, at 3 p.m., Tanya would get the boys back. John did argue slightly that it wasn't enough time with the boys, but he agreed anyways and just let it be at that. Wednesday, November 24th rolls around. John comes by and picks the boys up. Tanya states that there is nothing out of the norm, basic conversation, nothing seemed any different than any other day. This is about 3 months into the proceedings of the divorce, 2 to 3 counseling sessions, and there really at this point had been no other red flags to warn anybody of anything kind of coming. So John calls Tanya. She doesn't remember if it was that Wednesday night or if it was Thursday, but John was frantic and very strange and very adamant. He wanted to know, are we gonna work this out? Are we gonna make this work? Are we gonna work together? What are we gonna do about this? And Tanya said, I don't know. She didn't know at the time. And who does? That quickly. You can't really say yes or no. I don't think so. So her response was, I don't know. During this conversation, she could hear the boys in the background playing. So we know the boys were there. We know the boys were okay and that they were playing together at that point in time. Now, Black Friday rolls around. This is November 26th, 2010. Tanya wakes up and she was scheduled to get the boys back about 3 p.m. that day. She woke up really missing the boys, and she thought it wouldn't hurt, to call John and see if they didn't have, that big of plans that day, she could potentially get the boys back a little earlier. So she calls John, and John states that him and the boys are actually out of town. They're in Jackson, Michigan, hanging out and visiting and celebrating with the Taylor family. The name Joanne Taylor is not new to Tanya at this point. When John came back from Florida after his high school reunion, he stated that he had met a family that was broke down on the side of the road. They ended up by chance meeting. The whole family, was great, and he had a lot to say about them. Tanya even had gotten a friend request on Facebook from this Joanne Taylor. This, of course, is when Tanya gets off the phone and takes a look out her window. And she looks over at John's house, and she still sees his van in the driveway. So Tanya calls John going, "What?" John says, yeah, I had to leave my van there because I had no idea where I was going, even though I'm a truck driver, and they actually came and picked us up. Okay, so Tanya gets off the phone with him, and over the course of the next couple hours, they're texting back and forth. John starts saying some weird stuff. So as it progresses, Tanya finally says, okay, look, what's going on? What is really going on? John says, okay, I'm actually home, but the boys are actually with Joanne. Because, well, all of a sudden I had a lot of housework I had to do, and I just didn't think it was fair to the boys that they wouldn't get a proper Thanksgiving, and so I wanted them to go to Joanne so that they can get a good meal and celebrate and have a good time. And Joanne's supposed to be bringing them back at 3, which completely doesn't make any sense. At the beginning of this, he was arguing that the time that they had agreed on wasn't enough time, and now all of a sudden he didn't have time for them, so he sent them off to another town with another family instead of calling the boys' mom, who's 2 blocks away. That doesn't make sense to me. Tanya is continuing to try and give John the benefit of the doubt and believe him in what he is continuing to tell her. They kept in contact and continued to stay in contact, but John continued to not really give that much information. And John then calls Tanya to let her know that he's headed to the hospital because he had an accident doing some housework and actually fell and broke his ankle. Tanya panics. John is the only one that has any kind of contact information for this Joanne Taylor to be able to find out when she's coming back, if she's coming back, does she know where she's going, all the additional details that, she just wants her kids back. And now John's in the hospital because he fell. What's going on? So she panics. Tanya calls her attorney, explaining to him what's going on and how fishy the whole situation is, what her legal abilities and what she was able to do at that point in time in order to find her children. Her attorney told her just to go ahead and wait until 3. Once it's past 3 o'clock and you still don't have the children, that's when we can take action. Tanya listened. She said that she had a really bad feeling already, that things just weren't right. They were so bizarre that day, the excuses, the different stories that she was given. I can imagine what was going on in her head, and she did not feel good about the situation. Instead of waiting around to find out a ton of stuff, Tanya wanted to call the hospital and get a little bit more information on John's status and where he was at and what was going on with his foot. Of course, because they were still married, she was able to access that information. When she did, she got a huge surprise. The hospital informed Tanya that John had actually tried to commit suicide, and it was a failed attempt, and that was why he was there. With this information, Tanya immediately called the police and reported the boys missing because something was extremely wrong at this point, and she knew it. Tanya and her sister head over to John's house. She's on the phone. Tanya's on the phone with her attorney, stating, okay, I need to find the boys, explaining to him what had just happened at the hospital. She reported the boys missing and went over to John's house. Now, her attorney told her that she legally couldn't break in or try and get in by any means, but her sister was okay to try. Her sister, in good sister fashion, tried to help get into the house, and in doing so, she found everything completely blocked by stuff inside of the house, whether it was a window, a door. It seemed as though that there was always something blocking the door. Come 3 o'clock, there were no boys to be seen, and nobody showed. The police chief put out an Amber Alert immediately for all 3 boys. This tiny little town of 1,500 overnight blew up. All nearby agencies, including even the FBI, stepped in to help comb through and search for these boys. They went through and combed through all the local closer areas that would make a little bit sense to be closer to home to see if they were there. Then after that, they went to John's to search. When they got to John's, John had gone through and broke or had gotten rid of anything that pertained to John and Tanya. There was shattered glass everywhere. The furniture was literally torn apart. He had even taken a knife to the bed that they had shared and just stabbed it and tore through all of the mattress. Even though the house was trashed, they still were unable to find the boys there. Word spread fast about these boys. People jumped into action immediately looking for them. They literally left no stone unturned. They had gone through and combed as much property and field and back roads and whatever as they possibly could. In a continued effort to find these boys and find out what truly happened, police seized Tanya and John's electronic devices, and they thoroughly searched both of their homes. Tanya was so upfront and just showed the police everything that she had been going through, all the different stories and lies that John continued to tell her and try and feed her, and just all the different craziness that she had been experiencing from John over the course of the last 3 days. John turns to the police to tell them that he had to give the boys to Joanne Taylor to protect them from their mother because she was abusing them. Now, the police, of course, have to take this information seriously and investigate any kind of accusations like this. This is when the police turned back to Tanya. When they were searching her home, searching her electronics, searching her computer, they were thoroughly searching for any kind of evidence that would indicate that she was abusing the boys in any manner, whether it be sexual or just abusive in general. They talked to anybody that was associated with Tanya, anybody that had a connection to both the children and Tanya, if they'd had any interaction with both. They spoke to the secretary at the school, their teachers, their neighbors, principal. During all their investigating, they found the exact opposite to be true about Tanya. All the people said that they interviewed had stated that John and Tanya were the type of people that they absolutely loved their children so much. They gave zero indication that either of them would have harmed those children in any way, shape, or form. So they're investigating into looking for any signs of abuse from Tanya's end, gave them nothing. So with John's actions, with the Florida incident previous to this, they turned back to John. Not only because of Florida, but the fact that he also was in the hospital for a failed suicide attempt. So obviously something was wrong. Something put him into a distressed state to make him try and do something like that. Now, the information that they were able to obtain off of John's electronics, which was his home computer, were the most damning that I could possibly think of. He, the night before, on Thanksgiving evening, I believe, he searched, does rat poison kill children? The next thing he searched was, can you break someone's neck with just your hands? And this is days before they went missing. Now, John's sorry excuse for that was the fact that him and the boys that night had been watching a movie, and from this movie those boys had questions, and so he was just Googling the questions, trying to get the information for the boys. Baloney. My question to that would be, what movie are you watching that toddlers are dying from rat poison and breaking someone's neck with your bare hands? What movie is that? I want to know. I'm interested. To continue their investigation of John's electronics, the police got a warrant to triangulate John's whereabouts during the time in which the boys had gone missing. So, based on the information that they received from triangulating his cell phone pings, the morning of Black Friday, John went on a little drive very early that morning at 4:29 a.m. His phone pinged 3 miles from his house heading into Ohio, and 30 minutes later, it pinged in Holiday City, Ohio. Now, this was not out of the norm. Holiday City was a place that John and his family had gone to frequently. There was some kind of importance there with the family. I'm not quite sure what it was. It was more of like a trucker's spot where they had a little bit of everything, and truckers would come in, and I'm assuming that's how and or why John knew about it. His phone pinged at 5 a.m. in Holiday City, and at that point, either his phone had died or he shut it off. The next ping that the phone gave off was at 6:46 a.m., an hour and 46 minutes later, back at John's house. Once John got home, he began shooting off text messages, emails. He even began packing up some of his stuff. He had taken this stuff over to a family relative and said something along the lines of, I'm not going to be around to use this anymore. I'm not going to be needing this anymore. This didn't really give us a ton of answers to start with. So the police pushed John and said, look, if there's really abuse going on, we can help. Just tell us where the boys are at. We will get them. We will take them to a safe space. That way that you can still see your boys, and they will be safe if that is the case. And John just absolutely refused to give the location of the boys, which tells you a ton of things. Unfortunately, from what the police had stated, that this more than likely meant that the boys were already dead, or that whatever John had done to them was permanent. This is where it really reminds me of the Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell case. You remember? Listen. Okay, so Lori says, I just gave them to people to stay safe, and they're safe. Don't worry about them, though. They're safe. We know the ending of that story. We have a good idea as to what happened. We don't have really a why. But I think in this case with the Skeltons, we haven't found the boys yet, and we don't know what happened, but we know why. We have a pretty good idea as to why whatever happened, but we don't know exactly what. Since John refused to give the location of the boys, and he technically had given away the boys illegally, John was charged with 3 counts of kidnapping and 3 counts of unlawful imprisonment. While John's in jail waiting for trial, the police only have the triangulated location pings, and they have Joanne Taylor's name. That's it. They don't have an address. They don't have a phone number. They don't have anything else for her. And then there was, of course, his trip to Holiday City, which is technically in the opposite direction of Joanne Taylor. So the police and FBI went to search Holiday City. Holiday City is a very rural location. There is minimal towers out there. So of course, when his phone pinged out there, it was not very definitive on exactly where he was at. It was just in that vicinity. And so there isn't really a definite route, definite location for them to look. So they just kind of searched everything in Holiday City. And unfortunately, they turned up nothing. They checked all the routes and like the most probable route that he had taken, and still nothing. This is when they turned over their investigation over to the state police, hoping that a new fresh set of eyes would help progress this case a little bit further. Sergeant Jeremy Brewer took a crack at trying to figure out who this Joanne Taylor was. The only thing that they had that was related to the exact Joanne Taylor that John had always been referring to was that Facebook page. The same page that had sent Tanya a friend request a few months earlier. Further investigating this, the state police were able to make a determination that, in fact, that Facebook page was fake. And it was created by John. Weird. So at this point, Joanne Taylor and Holiday City were a complete bust. They turned up nothing and no information, and nothing pointing them in the next direction that they needed to go. John's trial comes up, and John, in John fashion, changes his story once again. In court, John states that, yeah, Joanne Taylor was fake, and I didn't give the boys to her, but I gave the boys to actually an underground organization called the United Foster Organization Underground Society. During his trial, John was overly emotional, crying continuously, and John would continue to say the same phrase throughout the entire trial, which was he had to do it because the system that failed him forced him to do it. And if he felt like he had any other option, he would have taken it. September of 2011, John pleaded no contest to 3 counts of unlawful imprisonment, and he had been given a sentence of 10 to 15 years in prison. The 3 counts of kidnapping had been dropped due to a deal that was made with John, and John was sent to Bellamy Creek Correctional Facility. John spent the first 4 years of prison in isolation, or what they would call segregation. Now, John's family are very quick to defend John, and they have stated repeatedly that his time spent at Bellamy Creek has been horrendous. His treatment has been unjustified. It was investigated a little bit by the podcast Shattered that looked into it a little bit further. The only things that they could find were actually John being aggressive with an officer. I'm not going to state the full details because I do not know them. I will give information at the end of this video to give to you, to do with what you want, which is hopefully go and listen. There's an amazing podcast on this that gives a ton more information, much more detailed than I could possibly give. So with John's family being so quick to defend him and be there by his side and still visit him, everybody has been hounding John's family for information. So much so that the family has really kind of shut down and stopped talking to media. They've stopped talking to police. They just want no part of it. They just feel like their family in general has been wronged in this whole situation. John's parents came to visit him while he was in prison, and after that meeting with him, his mother had come out and she said very matter-of-factly, the boys are safe and the boys are fine. It seemed almost like she knew something more, but what it came down to was she was just repeating exactly what her son had literally just told her. Unfortunately, John never gave his parents the information as to where the children were. And in my opinion, that's why I truly believe that something happened to those boys. If the boys were fine and you were just keeping them safe from their mother, why would you not give your own parents, the child's location? I truly just want to keep saying this is where it gets weird, but just the whole thing is just weird. The whole thing, just each time, like John takes it to a new bizarre step. So after his first trial, John still had another court date to go to, and that was his divorce with Tanya. This is where it gets weird. John insisted on representing himself within the proceedings of his own divorce. Again, in true John form, he was asking very strange questions to Tanya while she was on the stand, asking her questions like, are you okay with not seeing your boys? I mean, who asks that? And then asking, do you believe the children are safe? And asking, how exactly do you know for sure that your husband had anything to do with it? All of his questioning was in third person, and it made everyone extremely uncomfortable. Now, authorities were paying full attention to this court case. Even amongst all the mess that John was making out of this court case, the authorities were able to pay attention and focus on the stories and things that John was saying. John, of course, changes his story yet again. This time he says that he actually gave the children to the Amish or the Mennonite. And of course, authorities have gone down this rabbit hole, and there's no, from what they've been able to see, no validity to this theory. The people in the local community that are Amish did speak out and state that if they knew that these children were missing and somebody was looking for them, they are not whatsoever going to harbor them. In May of 2019, there was a tip that was called in. A woman stated that she remembered seeing a van that matched John's van's description, parked on the side of the road by a patch of water and woods in Pioneer, Ohio. Authorities took this tip to be very credible. They had other information that this tip lined up with that made them think that, okay, this is a legitimate tip to follow and we need to take it very seriously, and they sure did. The pond that the vehicle was parked next to is about a 14-foot deep pond, and they brought in divers, side scan sonar, and they even brought a cadaver dog to help in the search. And they searched and they scoured all the land surrounding this pond and in the pond, and they did not turn up anything. However, there is a piece of property that is very close to this that is private property that has yet to be searched. I have not found any new information on it actually being searched since then. If somebody has that information or knows that it has been, please, please, please update me. Comment down below. This case is very near and dear to my heart. I will be checking on a daily. Tanya is still keeping hopes that she will be reunited with her boys once again. John has been speaking out from prison, and guess what? He changed his story again. Now John claims that he actually met 3 individuals at JD's truck stop in Niles, Michigan. And he saw these people and he said, oh, that's the 3 people that I think they're gonna do great with my kids, so I'm gonna give them to those people. Look, Joanne was fake, made up. This underground foster group is unsubstantiated. The Amish Mennonite has been confirmed to be untrue. Now, the 3 people in Niles, there's zero evidence of that actually being the case. And I'm sorry, but the drive time for that does not match up. John fully claims that the boys are living on the Indiana-Ohio state line on a farm where they can run free. And you see where I'm going with this? Like, they have tons of room to play and run. This automatically goes back to, I'm sure, everybody else's experience of your parents, they had to put your old dog down and they say, oh, we took her to a nice farm in upstate New York and she's got so much room to play. It doesn't work with your kids, dude. Now, I am going to try my best not to cry, but I really wanted to cover this case because of a few things. I will say it again. I live 2.5 hours from Morenci, Michigan, which is where this took place, and I never heard this story until I came to Facebook and I saw Danielle Hallen taking this case over and rocking it. This is before I found the Shattered podcast. I live 2.5 hours away. If these boys are still missing, bodies are not found, and they're still missing and living on the Indiana-Ohio state line, why do I not know about it? Like, I am so mad about that the media hasn't covered it nearly enough around here. I'm from around here. I know these boys are missing. And I have 2 boys of my own that if I lost them, I don't know what I would do. I take it very close to heart. I definitely wanted to do this case now because 48-year-old John Skelton is scheduled to have a teleconference parole hearing the week of July 27th, 2020. It's a couple weeks away, guys. If John's parole hearing goes well for him, he could be released as early as November 29th of this year. Now, his maximum discharge date could be November 29th, 2025, another 5 years spent in prison. In my opinion, if I was the judicial system, John would stay in prison until he told somebody where those boys are at, because they are still missing. Andrew, Alexander, Tanner are still missing. Anyone with any kind of leads or tips, any information you may have, please contact the Michigan State Police. I will post the phone number down below and I will state it now, 517-636-0689. Anything that you could possibly think of that might have any kind of correlation with John, the boys, anything. As I always say, I encourage you to continue going down this rabbit hole, continue looking, continue searching to find more information on this case. Please check out the podcast Shattered. I will link it down below. As always, I appreciate you guys coming by and listening to this case. Please share. Even if it's not my video, I don't care about the video, guys. Take their picture, Google it. That's all you gotta do. Skelton Brothers, search it. Take their picture, post it out there. Any information. Thank you.